What's up, people who live in a country that doesn't want you anymore? I'm Felipe Durante, Brazilian engineer living in the south of China, and I'm here debunking more propaganda against China. So this guy, actually there's basically two guys that are very big on YouTube, and they just say bad stuff about China because it makes money. That's how they make money. And of course they live in the United States. So let's see what they're saying about China is getting rid of all foreigners. I'm still here though.
不少外国人纷纷来到我国定居，享受不一样的风土人情。但到底发生了什么？定居中国的外国人纷纷逃回国，真相让人无奈。
What? What is this? So foreigners are leaving China en masse. Well, they've been doing this for a while now. Now, the key phrase here is foreigner. You have to understand what a foreigner is. By Chinese definition, a foreigner is just anyone that's not Chinese. And I'm talking about anybody that's from America.
Like we say gringo in Brazil. Everyone who's outside of Brazil is a gringo.
Anyone that's from Russia, anyone that's from Europe. These are foreigners, right? Anyone that's from Africa. If you're from like Korea or Japan, sometimes they'll be called foreigners, but they'll also, actually use their country's name sometimes or say, a fellow Asian person or whatever. But by and large, if you're a foreigner, you're just not from China. And it's not just you're not from China, because if you're a Chinese American, you're in China, you're considered Chinese, right?
Yes.
Even if you're an American citizen, even if you've never been to China before, you're still Chinese. It's about this, it's kind of like a racial identity. If you're not Chinese, then you are a foreigner. So why are foreigners leaving China en masse? Well, it's quite simple. It's just a really bad place to be if you're a foreigner right now. And it's all the byproduct of the Chinese government. When they decide that it's time for something, or they decide that it's time to get rid of something, then it happens. When the Chinese government makes a decision and it becomes the paramount decision of their identity at that point, then it gets done, right? Here's the deal. I moved to China in 2008, and I gotta say, we use this phrase a lot, but it really was a golden period. We call it the golden period of China. Yeah. I think it spans anywhere from like the early 2000s up until, I'm gonna say like around 2015.
Because those guys here, they were like kings. They were making a lot of money. A lot of money. And China really needed the foreigners. Education in China was still not that good. The universities of China were not on the top 100 in the world. This changed it. Just change it. Now, China has one of the best educations in the world. The universities are high level. They don't really need foreigners anymore. It's not like China wants to kick out the foreigners. They just don't need it. So all the package, like the salary package that was amazing 10 years ago, doesn't exist anymore, because they don't really need to pay way more for foreigners like you that were just a teacher here because you are American and you are native speaker of English, because they don't really need it. That's the difference.
2015 is when you got the first inklings that maybe foreigners were not going to be accepted in China anymore. I'd say 2016 was the year that it started getting really bad, and then 2017 was when the writing was on the wall. And if you're a foreigner like myself that had any sort of big following, online presence, a fan base, anything like this, you were definitely on a list for people to get rid of in the country. And that's because during this golden period of China, what happened was
this is a guy who escaped China and
initial leadership, so Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, those two leaders were kind of more pro-West in a way. Not that they wanted Western values, not that they wanted China to become like a Western country at all, not whatsoever. But they were more in line with the fact that, hey, these foreign companies, these foreign countries, when they invest in China, they make our job a lot easier because the economy goes up, people are given more jobs, China becomes more accepted on the global stage, and people take it more seriously, and people's standards of life gets to improve, right? If you have a fairly open economy, if you have free trade, and you give Chinese people the opportunity to be able to trade with other countries and then also invest and trade with these foreign companies in China, all of a sudden you've got recipe for success. Because then you can operate your Chinese Communist Party and all its restrictions and its freedom, limitations on freedom and stuff Because the average person's life is getting better. The average person's standard of life, their quality, their salary,
That's so bad, right?
the food that they can consume, the places they can go on vacation, the things that they can afford to do with disposable income that didn't exist before means that that person is going to be happier.
Didn't exist before the Communist Party of China?
By and large, with their new standard of living. And the leadership understood that that was necessary, and not only was that necessary, it was just a huge boon for the Chinese Communist Party, because they could still have their leadership, they could still have their insiders club, they could still have a monopoly over the general power of the country, but people were less apt to complain. So why would it kind of turn for the worst? Well, a lot of things happened, and the most important thing that happened was Xi Jinping was put into power. Xi Jinping was almost seen as like this more liberal, more reformist, kind of more open-minded leader. He was a safe choice. He was appointed by the people within the Communist Party of China because he kind of wasn't a radical. He was just going to do things by the book and maybe even allow for some reform to happen within the Communist Party of China. What happened was he ended up being another version of Chairman Mao. He wanted power, he consolidated power, he got rid of anybody that stood in his way, and he got rid of anyone that could potentially be a problem down the road. Now, in his power consolidation, he went back to the old school theories of communism under Chairman Mao, in that there needs to be a...
Because the Communist Party of China is not a solid thing. There's many groups inside. There is more left, like Xi Jinping, and there's less left towards center, more or less, that Li Qiang and the other guys on the party. It's not one thing only. There's many groups inside, and there's power struggle, and there's all the politics, but inside one party.
A political figurehead, a political leader that has cult-like status, that controls the way the wind blows, that controls everything in the country, and to make sure that any sort of foreign competition is not allowed to proliferate in the country, and that the state can come fully under control over everything, every facet of people's lives, every facet of the economy, of every facet of the way that China deals with the rest of the world. Of course, those things, those authoritarian principles that have killed off many countries in the past, like the USSR and the Khmer Rouge and all of these other dictatorships, those elements that actually hurt and damage a country and turn them into hermit states, kind of like North Korea, is exactly what Xi Jinping has done. And in the process, when you demonize these companies, when you try to have complete control over the economy, over every facet of life, you're going to have to make an enemy. And especially when COVID hit the world, it first started in Wuhan. China needed an enemy outside of itself to be able to point the blame elsewhere, because the people were dying and suffering. And
China never blamed no one else. What are you talking about? China is not the United States that literally called COVID as China virus. Brazil also did the same because our president is very stupid. But it didn't happen here.
And the economy was taking a huge hit. You needed to have a scapegoat. You needed to have other countries out there that were the creators of COVID, or they're the ones that let it get out of control, or they're the ones that are trying to hurt China. There's all these outside entities, these foreign forces as they call them, that China made sure that the blame was never placed on themselves. And that in turn creates mass amounts of xenophobia. There were huge campaigns led by the government, and we started to see these unfold, where foreigners were just blamed for everything. And of course, when you have a country that...
Again, no proofs. Those guys, they just get arguments out of the butt and they don't prove anything. It's just like monkeys, throwing poop on people. There's no proof. What happened was, when Chinese saw a foreigner, this happened more in 2020. They don't know if I arrived today in China or 10 years ago. So they were afraid. There was some hotels not accepting foreigners, and I've heard that this happens sometimes. Or what happens today is if someone sees me, they put a mask, but that's it. Nothing really changed regarding xenophobia or whatever. What happened in Guangzhou, I was living there when COVID started, they blamed the Africans for spread of COVID. They said a black African ran away from quarantine and he was positive for COVID. But actually it was a Chinese nurse who ran away from quarantine. Didn't matter. There was a lot of craziness against, a lot of racism against black people in Guangzhou and other parts of China because they were spreading COVID, and actually was a lie. This was very bad. Even some McDonald's shop put a warning, we don't accept black people, and then McDonald's just closed that store. So this really happened. This is very bad.
Country that has no freedom of press, no outside information coming in, the Great Firewall blocks off the rest of the world from entering or exiting China. Everyone has an intranet, a government-controlled narrative. Then of course they're going to start seeing the outside world or foreigners on the street walking around in China as the enemy, right?
That's what I'm talking about. Those things happened in China. Doesn't happen anymore. I can go anywhere. I was traveling in Yunnan for 7 days and everything was fine. I've been living in China since COVID started, and only like a couple situations that was not that comfortable, but that's it. It's not like they want us out.
Right? Unfortunately, that's just the case. Now, not everyone is guilty of this, but it was definitely a sentiment that was allowed to pervade throughout China. In fact, it was actively encouraged by the government and through its policies and its propaganda. Of course, there's a big problem here, because the Chinese government also relies on foreigners to promote its own kind of utopian bull.
China never said this is to blame on foreigners. What happened actually last month with the monkeypox, a very stupid rule saying don't touch foreigners. That was very stupid. But about COVID, the government never said the foreigners are to blame for COVID. It never happened.
Bullshit propaganda narrative. It relies on the fact that foreigners do move to China, foreigners like myself, and they use that as propaganda to say, hey, see, it's not us Chinese people moving to America in droves, it's actually foreigners coming here to China, the promised land. And it's used as propaganda, right?
They never did that. China does. I know zero Chinese who say this is the promised land. Zero Chinese.
Unfortunately, when you demonize that populace, when you demonize the foreigners that are doing promotion for you, you eventually drive them out. And this is kind of how it went down. You had foreigners that were leaving around the same time I did, so 2018, around that time, because the writing was on the wall. They had detained the two Michaels from Canada arbitrarily, just so they had pawns in this game that they wanted to win diplomatically with the US and Canada.
Canada arrested these women for no reason, and then it's okay, right? You literally are from, I guess you're from the United States, the country that arrested most journalists in 2021. The country who wants to put, what's his name, the Australian guy? I forgot his name. Julian Assange in jail forever, for life, because he showed how bad the United States was in Iraq or Afghanistan, whatever, it was bad anywhere. But that's okay, right?
You saw things like random drug testing happening all over the country where they were throwing foreigners in jail before they...
This happened all the time in China. As I was told, this has been happening since forever.
Sent them home and deported them forcefully. You saw Africans being kicked out onto the street just because they were black.
Like I said,
and the Chinese government had decided that black people were the cause of COVID at that point. So they...
No, it was not the government. It was not the government. It was fake news and gossips from Guangzhou. It was not the government saying this is from black people.
They're kicked out on the street, removed from their apartments and hotels. You saw very xenophobic and awful racist things coming out of the country, and it was promoted by the government.
Yeah.
This was government policy.
No, it wasn't.
But then you had the people that kind of stuck through it, and they said, you know what, this has nothing to do with me. I'm just going to keep my head down. This will blow over. And they stayed. But then, unfortunately, COVID hit. China started pointing the blame of COVID on other countries around the world, and people started to leave because they were getting dirty looks. People were rushing to the other side of the road to stay away from them, or moving away from them on the subway, or calling them the foreign virus, things like this. Really awful things started happening within China. So then people started to leave, and they said, you know what, maybe I'll just go to Vietnam, or I'll go to Thailand and teach there for a little while. I'm going to go do business in another country until this blows over, and then I'll come back to China. Unfortunately, China closed its borders, and those people weren't allowed back. The vast majority of people didn't get to go back, so they lost their...
But if they want to leave for all this situation, this bad situation, why they want to come back to China?
jobs, they lost their pay. China then at the same time as all this happening, started to nationalize all the private education. So all of these schools or, private educational enterprises that these people had.
That's so funny. He's using Radio Free Asia. Well, thank you very much, because I would like to talk about Radio Free Asia and I didn't have the chance. So Radio Free Asia was created by CIA in the 50s to spread anti-communist propaganda in Asia. They also have Radio Free Europe, I think, and Voice of America for Latin America. It's basically United States propaganda. About this nationalization of private schools, what happened was a huge gap between people who can pay for extra classes like English, French, piano, whatever class, and people who cannot. This was creating an imbalance, a big imbalance in China, and the government said this is not okay. There was a lot of pressure, especially from the rural areas, to stop this, because that people they don't have access to this kind of education, or they don't have enough money for that. That's why.
Had started to get acquired by the government or forced to shut down. So then a lot of people lost their jobs anyway, and they said, hey,
90% of those places closed. And people lost their jobs. A lot of still here. Like 10% of those places are still working. Some working under the table, because this also happens in China. And many people are working here teaching with tourist and business visa. So
maybe I'll try to find a state-run job. I'll work in a public middle school or a high school. Those jobs dried up too. They were very sought after, fairly highly paid, had decent benefits. Yeah. So people had no option or recourse, so they left. So the last people that were left were the people that said, okay, if I leave and I try to come back, I'm not going to be allowed in. I just got to stick it out. I'm just going to keep my head down. I'm going to stay as long as I can, and hopefully this blows over. And some of those people included people that work on behalf of the Chinese propaganda department, the people that work for state media, the people that just do travel promotion and stuff. Some of these people stuck it out, but then even they started to leave, because the writing has never been more clear on the wall that if you're a foreigner in China...
Many people are leaving because it's not easy to get back to China. Now actually it's easier. It's only 10 days quarantine, only 2 PCR tests before the flight, and that's it. There is Brazilians coming to China, and Brazil is very far. But many companies don't allow people to leave. It's not that they don't allow, but they don't want people wasting time on quarantine when they're back, because they're not producing anything. So this is really happening. And many people are tired. They have been here for 3 years without seeing family, without going out of China and friends and going back to their countries. So that's why they are leaving, which sad. I'm not saying this is not bad, it is. But it's not the government getting rid of the foreigners. Sometimes it's just because the company doesn't accept the foreigner to travel and come back and stay in quarantine.
China, you are absolutely not welcome by the Chinese government. They are actively trying to remove people from the country. But that really...
The easiest way was just not renew the visas. Why go through all this effort and all this propaganda and all this, look, foreigners, go away? If they want to do something, as you really said, and when Chinese government wants to do something, they really do, just don't renew the visas. It's the easiest way. Because we have to renew the visa every year, every 2 years, every 3 years. Just don't do it.
That really does backfire, because like I said, they rely on these people to do soft power. So they got to come out with some sort of answer, because guess what? If you look around the Chinese internet, people on the Chinese internet, when they get wind of videos like mine, or, the stuff we cover on ADV Podcasts or ADV China or Serpent ZA, when they see things like this or inklings of it or breakdowns of it, they say, why are foreigners leaving China? Because I've been told over and over again by the government that foreigners are moving to China because it's the new promised land. It's a new place to make money. It's just much better than their home countries. So why are they leaving? So the government had to put something out there. They had to put out some sort of explanation, some sort of...
There's around 900,000 foreigners in China. There's 1.4 billion of Chinese. They don't really care about us. They're not really thinking, there's less foreigners in my city now. What's happening? Why the government's kicking out the foreigners? They don't really care. Like, really? And also, the government China has 5,000 years. They don't care about us. China will still be here in hundreds of years. Really? You are not that important. You're just a random white American.
Some sort of reason why foreigners are leaving the country. And I kid you not, this is the most insane and hilarious thing you've ever seen in your life.
不少外国人纷纷来到我国定居，享受不一样的风土人情。但到底发生了什么？定居中国的外国人纷纷逃回国，真相让人无奈。众所周知，中国虽然地大物博，但是人口极多，这也就导致了在中国，无论是就业压力还是生活压力都非常的大。想要在中国生存，就必须适应这种超快节奏的生活方式。
This doesn't really look like government propaganda because first there's no music. If you are used to Chinese videos, there's always background music, always. It's just a random person reading some random Chinese text.
生活方式，但是这对于一些生活节奏慢的国家的人来说，几乎是不可能做到的，尤其是欧洲和非洲。非洲人们的生活方式可真是跟中国存在着天壤之别。非洲一直是一个靠天吃饭的地方，由于这里气候高温多雨，到处都有结满野果子的树林，他们就地取材的习惯让人有点接受。比如他们饿了就摘果子捕猎物，渴了就挑。
He doesn't say where this text is coming from, who is this person reading this, and of course this is not connected to this video. It's just a voiceover.
喝水喝。
So it says, with the continuous growth of China's national strength, foreigners come to settle here in China and enjoy different customs and culture. Yeah, absolutely. That was definitely the reason a lot of us came. I mean, I absolutely loved China. I loved exploring it. I loved getting on my motorcycle and making friends around the entire country, learning about different customs and cultures and foods and languages and dialects and all that kind of stuff. It was an amazing place to be. But this woman says, what happened? These foreigners are escaping back to their countries. And guess what? I can actually claim ownership of part of this phrase here because the Chinese government, when I made my video about how I had to escape from China.
Yeah, I have a react about it. It's so much drama, even for me as Latino. It's too much drama.
A very harrowing tale of how I nearly didn't make it out.
Whoa.
They hate that video. They had entire campaigns of people going out there to try and like debunk my escape story. They went out there was forum posts, there was videos, there was paid advertisements about how my story is absolutely...
These white guys. And I say the white guys because I'm Latino. Here in China, I'm treated as white. But in the US, in Europe, or Australia, I'm treated as Latino and all the prejudice and stereotypes that come with it. These people, they really think they're important in this world. Man, you're just another white man who left China. The government doesn't really care about you. If the China government wanted you, they would have put your hands when you were in Hong Kong. They don't care about you. It's not, they are paying, no one, for example, is paying me to do this reactor right now. I'm an engineer, I work on a factory. I do this because it's too much stupidity around there against China.
Absolutely not true, and how I could have left whenever I wanted, and China's a free country and all this kind of stuff. And I see this kind of language, this escaping in quotes, coming back into their propaganda campaign. I'd like to say I definitely had something to do with that. But anyway, these foreigners are escaping back to their countries. A slight at me. Happy to have influenced state propaganda. And the truth is frustrating. It's well known that China is rich and vast, but the population base. If you're gonna live in China, you gotta stick with the fast pace of China. And I can absolutely tell you that is such bullshit. Absolute drivel garbage.
Yeah, it is.
China is...
Again, who wrote this text? Who wrote this? Doesn't have to say, that's the point. If they just throw information, it's like the other guy, Serpentier, they just throw information and that's it. Who is the source? No need source, because it's just a white man saying bad stuff about China.
China is definitely not the kind of place that I would call fast-paced. I would call the population high. I would say it's incredibly crowded in a lot of places, but I absolutely wouldn't say the pace of life is outpacing somewhere like New York City or something, or Tokyo or something like this. The average person in China is not necessarily rushing to get everywhere. Yeah. I would say life is fairly slow-paced, with huge cities with tons of people and stuff, but it's not necessarily like everyone's scrambling to rush around and get everywhere. I think the average foreigner, moving to China would definitely be impressed with how many people there were, but they wouldn't be like, I just can't handle this pace of life. But for people from a country with a slow pace of life, it's just impossible for them to adjust.
Who wrote this?
Especially Africans and Europeans.
Who
So they're
wrote
going to
that?
now scapegoat Africans and Europeans, but you're actually going to see what they're going to do is only scapegoat Africans, because that tends to be what the Chinese government does. They love to use things like blackface and demean African and black people. While
You are literally from the United States. Like, really? Really? We always need to try to understand the context. China didn't really have much contact with Africans. This is not an excuse for the racism, but we need to understand that this is happening from, 100 years ago, something like that. It's a process to understand. Should not have racism anywhere in the world. I'm from a very racist country in Brazil, as this guy is, from the United States, I guess. But we need to understand why it's like that. Some places in China here, they probably never saw a black person in their lives.
While at the same time going to Africa to exploit African resources. It's a very weird catch-22 bizarro.
You're from the United States. You had slavery for, 400 years, and you were talking about exploiting Africa?
A world situation going on. The African lifestyle is just so different from China.
No,
Africa has always been a
place.
place with abundant prey. What is this? Is this like a colonialist guide from the 1700s with like a guy in a pith helmet
You probably know very well about that, right?
walking around talking about the natives? Because this just came out. When they're thirsty, they just drink from the river.
No.
This from the river and hunting wild prey. That'll be the official reason. Why are foreigners leaving? It's not because they're making life absolutely miserable for foreigners in China. It's not because they're promoting rampant xenophobia and racism. It's not because they're
That's
saying
not
that
true.
every country around the world is the enemy of China and China is the only people.
That's not true at all. China doesn't. I think only United States, sometimes they say United States is the enemy. Because United States almost every week have their navy around China. Almost every week there's some military air force from the United States invading Chinese airspace. So basically, it's the United States poking China, and China is saying, look, this is the enemy. But they don't say that about Brazil, for example. They don't really care about Argentina or Chile or many countries in Africa. They care in a different way, but not as enemy. They don't do that. There's just a lot of lies. And again, they don't need to prove anything, those guys. They just say whatever they want. Again, there's no source from the text, from this text that he was reading. There is no source for anything. It's just a lot of things from their butt. Like,
Only peaceful country in the world and that they have to hold their ground. It's not all of these awful things that you don't even hear about. It's because Africans can't pick fruit in their yard and drink out of rivers and hunt prey. Because that is the official narrative coming out of China, and I hope it gives you some perspective.
where is the link? Where is the document to show this is officially from the government? Where it is? Doesn't exist because it's just a lie.
Perspective on how obscene and ridiculous the Chinese government is. Because here's the deal. Chinese government, you made your bed and now you got to sleep in it. You had an entire entourage of people like myself, people like Winston, that we used to go out there and show what real life in China was like, and we
There are a lot of racist white guys in China and xenophobic
inspired
as well.
hundreds, if not thousands of people to come visit the country because we humanized the country when it was being demonized unfairly.
See the white savior? The white savior, of course, China needed the two white saviors to come here and humanize the country to show to the rest of the world, look, China's not that bad. We are white people are saying China is nice. Come to visit China because you can trust us. We are white people.
You know, with what we thought on media. We gave a human face to China because China is a human face. It's a human.
So before you, there was no human face of China, right? Again, they needed the white guy from the United States to do that, and the white guy colonizer from South Africa to do that.
Human country. It's a beautiful country with a beautiful people. And it's a beautiful country with lots of amazing culture and things to see. It's a fascinating place. But you, Chinese government, have made your bed. You've created a massive xenophobic hotbed for hatred in your own country, which is forcing people to leave. And then you have to go on state media and blame it all on Africans not being able to pick fruit and drink river water. I'm sorry, Chinese.
Again, there's no state media. It's just you reading and a woman reading this text from nowhere. You are the racist xenophobic here. And I don't understand how people cannot see that.